Thanks for taking the time to be here today. We really appreciate it. Before we dive into all this incredible equipment, let's just go back to the beginning and maybe we could find a little bit more about your first inspirations when it comes to electronic music.
Well, it was, obviously I started out as a vinyl DJ, going to check out all my favorite sort of vinyl DJs at the time, because that was the only format for us DJs. And, I come from an era where a DJ would typically play an extended set, every week pretty much. They would show up, create a certain atmosphere with how they set up, their area, lighting candles, burning incense or whatever like that, and then go about taking people on sort of a journey, playing from the very beginning, maybe starting with something super mellow, ambient or whatever, and then kind of like, a meal at a nice restaurant where you sit down and they give you like, a cocktail at first, and then the amuse-bouche comes out, then appetizers, then main course, then dessert, having it kind of play out like that for sometimes 8-9 hours. So that's the kind of era that I was educated in. I feel like gave me a great foundation for attacking the technological advances and the way DJing as an art form has advanced, currently.
And as that advancement happened, did you have ideas that you wanted to pursue but the technology wasn't possible, or were you more inspired by what was happening with the development of technology?
I think it's a bit of both. Definitely I had ideas that I needed either the technology or whoever it was that I was collaborating with, whichever engineer it was at the time. In the beginning, I didn't have any money to buy equipment, so I had to collaborate with other people who had the equipment. John Selway, who's sort of a well-known techno producer, was one of the earliest people that I collaborated with, and also BT, who's gone on to have quite a bit of success. We went to high school together. We're inseparable from 7th grade, and Brian was the only kid in school that had just a ridiculous amount of equipment, and to this day, he's a complete gear junkie. And I used to go to music stores with him. First of all, I was in complete awe of the setup that he had in his bedroom, and then we'd go to, at the time it was called Venom and Music, but now it's Guitar Center. We would go there and just spend hours and hours and hours just like fiddling with stuff, getting inspired, and of course we used that technology in whatever way we could to translate these ideas that we had in our head into, a song or a remix or a performance or whatever.
What was your first studio setup like? What was the first bit of kit you got and thought, okay, I can do this, I can make tracks, this is exciting, and I'm inspired?
Oh, it's such a long time ago, I can't really remember. I think it was when I got a 16-channel Mackie, just an analog board. I had a Juno 106. I had a Kurzweil sampler, so I spent a lot of time with my Kurzweil sampler. I had an SP1200, just because all the New York guys, that's how they got that swing. Not only the early house pioneers like Todd Terry and Kenny Dope and those guys, but all the hip hop producers, because they were, that early sort of masters of work. Todd Terry house sound was heavily influenced by the hip hop that was happening in New York at the time, and they were all using the same equipment. It was either the SP1200 or the Akai MPC60. So I had an SP1200 and I had lots of fun with that. And I just, I just bounced around from one engineer to another, whoever was willing to show me or collaborate with, at the time, Sharam and I. And they helped us build a studio when we could afford to buy different pieces of equipment. And then I learned and picked up something from everybody that I collaborated with. And some of the engineers were self-taught, and the other engineers who we had a lot of arguments with, they did everything sort of by the book. And they had gone to school for it, so they were like, no, you can't do this. But we always questioned everything. There was no can't. It was just, why not?
And is getting ideas down quickly when you have them really important for you?
It's very important, yeah, because you don't want to, it's important to not lose the moment that because creativity comes in weird places, in weird times, and it's very important to have, to set up some sort of a way where you can quickly access your technology if being a musician and a DJ and stuff is your career, then you have to have these tools in place to be able to immediately lay down an idea so that you can come back to it later. I mean, I have tons and tons of ideas that I haven't been able to come back to, but at some point I do come back, and it sounds fresh, and it sparks a new sort of direction for that idea, and I'm able to go and explore that and see if it leads anywhere. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you scrap, the whole thing. Yeah, I've been known to scrap remixes after working on it for a complete month, every day, literally for a month, and then playing it out every weekend, whatever. And in the end, I'm like, no, this just is not cutting it.
I guess it takes a lot of courage to say after all that time as well, this isn't working. Let's move on. Was there a point where that self-filter, has that developed over time?
As you gain experience, as you learn about who you are as a producer and stuff, as you gain more confidence, you have to understand that, once we release something, it's out there, and it's out there forever. So, and you're putting your name on it. For me, it's never been about the 15 minutes of fame. This is all about, and a lot of the mainstream artists will tell you the same thing. This game is all about longevity. You really have to think about longevity. Right now, there's a ton of kids getting into it for all the wrong reasons. Just as there are a lot of other kids that definitely have their heart in the right place and why they're getting into this music. But there's a lot of people getting into it for the private jets, for the lifestyle, for the 5-star this, 5-star that. And for me, it's always been about the long haul game plan.
Shall we take a look at your DJ setup? Maybe you could just give us a brief overview
it's like
of
an airplane cockpit.
Yeah, it looks cool. Of how it goes, how it comes together.
I have to say, I really envy the DJs that just roll into a club with a USB stick. And
some headphones, USB stick, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes I do an after party with that, and it feels fantastic to not have to take all this around. So basically, I use an RME UFX. It's called the Fireface sound card. There's nothing wrong with the Audio 10 from Native Instruments. It's a fantastic sound card. Lots of Marco Carolla, Loco Dice, a lot of these guys still use it. But I found that because I play predominantly MP3s, 320 kbps MP3s, I find that it gives it a fuller, punchier sound. So I have that, MacBook Pro running Traktor. I have two X1s, which are my controllers, plus an F1, which I use for the remix decks. Everything's going through a zone mixer. I also have a push controller running drum sequences. I'm running Ableton in the background, and and everything kind of comes together somehow.
So how did you arrive at this setup? I mean, there's a lot going on. Is it difficult to keep track of it, or was it a step-by-step process and now you know it very well?
Yeah, it was step-by-step. I mean, originally, like I said before, I started out as a vinyl DJ, then I jumped to playing with the early versions of the CD players. And even when I was playing with vinyl, I remember now taking a portable DAT player with me and plugging that in and trying to mix by hitting the play button, and there was always a timing lag between when I hit play and when the track started, so I had to adjust by changing the pitch of the turntable. So I was already dabbling with digital technology while I was playing with vinyl, and then I jumped to the early versions of the Pioneer CD players, which were great, and I went through every version, and then once I made the jump to laptop DJing, I actually was using Serato, and then for years, and then I wanted to make the switch to Traktor, and I think it wasn't until Native Instruments took Traktor away from Final Scratch and made it a proprietary, thing for them that I decided to make the jump. And then Mike, who goes by the name of DJ Endo, was instrumental in helping me to make the switch. Native wanted me to make the switch, so they sent him out because I didn't have time to figure out how to use it and set it up and all that other stuff. And then after that, he sort of became my DJ tech. And whenever we made a major upgrade in my setup, Mike was involved in that and helping me with the programming and stuff.
And speaking of major upgrades, you're on the verge of a major upgrade in your DJ setup. You've brought along the new Traktor Kontrol D2s, which are just on the market. I don't know, do you guys want to introduce how they work?
I mean, the D2s, I'm in between my old setup and the new setup. The cool thing about the D2s is that you have a display, so you don't need to like really look at the laptop. All your functions and features are on the display, and you're always looking down anyway at your mixer, so it's just natural to kind of look to your left and your right on display. And you can browse through your library, you can load tracks, control effects, and the one major element that makes this very appealing for me is the stems file format.
And is stem something that you've been craving for a while now?
Oh yeah, I mean, I can't believe when they came to, we were working in the studio in February, and Carmen from Native came over, and he's like, I want to show you something. And I didn't hear anything about it prior to that, but I'd been, over dinner with producers over the years and DJs, we would always talk about how we wish we had like a new file format that allowed us to have that kind of flexibility and creativity with the music that we have. And lo and behold, Native came along and developed this thing that we're all going to have a lot of fun with, and I'm sure it's going to be, controversial.
Will you be changing the way you produce with this in mind now? Do you think that'll either consciously or subconsciously affect the way you approach making a track?
I don't think so, because when I'm producing, I'm not really thinking about, I'll probably never think about how the DJ is going to play my tracks. I think about how I want my tracks to, when I make a track or a remix or whatever like that, I think about being in the middle of the dance floor with the rest of the crowd and the kind of experience I want to have when that music comes out of the speakers. So I've got one foot firmly in the DJ booth and one foot firmly on the dance floor. When I first went solo, I tried to create these really, really long tracks that were actually in two parts so that the DJ didn't really have to do much. I mean, all the filters, all the big breakdowns, and that two-part sort of approach to the track where you have like one vibe and then it kind of seeks perfectly into the second vibe was all there in like a 13-minute mix. And I really wanted to create that journey without the DJ having to create that journey for me.
So we take a look at how you use Traktor. So you run 4 decks in Traktor, is that right?
I use three decks that I load just a track in, and then the 4th deck is like this remix deck. And I basically have like, I create like sort of loop libraries. I group loops together that work together, and then I'm able to bring them in one by one or separately. So this is one loop.
And these loops are actually made from tracks that he has. So you can basically set a loop in a track, drag it into a remix deck cell, let it play 3 times, and then that loop, that 2/4 beat loop, is saved on your computer. So you're basically making your own homemade library.
And I go through a lot of demos, and sometimes when I get a demo, I like maybe the first minute of it. Like maybe I like a particular loop in the middle or the beginning or the end. So I can capture that very easily by just dragging it into a remix deck after I've selected the loop in a regular deck, and then voila, I have that loop. So this is like one loop that So by taking out the kick and adding more layers, I'm able to keep everything sort of, keep it from getting distorted. So this is another loop. And then I'm gonna add a third one. And then here's a 4th one. So you can play that as like its own track and have fun with just those elements, or play it underneath another song that maybe needs like an extra layer of drums. And a lot of times I use the remix decks to add more power to certain tracks that I'm playing that need it. You know, maybe the melodies are great and the bass line is good, but the drums are a bit lacking. So when you're playing, and you know, Luciano's a classic example of this. Like if you hear him DJ, he's always got like, and I love his style, and I can't do it. He just does it so well. He's always layering like a percussion loop and a really cool swinging hip-hop-ish sort of drum loop underneath everything. And sometimes he's got like the same loops running throughout the entire set that he's playing, and then he's bringing in one track after another on top of that. And just it creates it creates his own individual style. You know, like when I walk into a room and a particular DJ is playing, I think the best compliment that you can give any DJ is to know instinctively and tell them, yeah, I knew that was you that was playing.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you actually, what are the main challenges with this setup? What are the things that you wish you could upgrade right now, or the frustrations that you have, if any?
My frustrations have to do with like trivial shit, like getting through airport security with all this stuff. You know, some airports are more complicated than others, but really, like being able to one day eliminate all the cabling would be fantastic, and that's a huge source of frustration for me. And also, like making everything thinner, lighter, more portable. And trying to take away some of this technology. Every year I make kind of a New Year's resolution to myself to like get rid of one piece of equipment that I'm lugging around. And for whatever reason, I'm always ending up adding one more later. Yeah, so it's a bit unmanageable right now. So
yeah, and push is involved as well. I mean, what role does Ableton play in your live setup?
It runs in the background. It's obviously running the drum sequences. So on top of all this, when I'm playing tracks, I'm also like, just play. So I'm able to create fills and run drum sequences right on top. Also, I use Ableton's effects to affect anything that's coming. The way everything is routed is it's all going back into the sound card, and then through Ableton. And whenever I turn up a send on the zone, it sends the signal into Ableton, and then through whatever effect I decide to engage. So it's cool to play with effects. Okay, I'll give you an example. So you can have fun with delays and reverbs and stuff like that. I was like, the reason why my name is Dubfire is because I was massively into dub reggae, and dub reggae for me was the foundation of all this. Like it's still what inspires and influences me the most in terms of my production style in some ways, and how I use delays and reverbs and the kind of atmosphere that I want to create with all that.
Yeah, and both programs are synced as well. So Ableton is synced to Traktor. So we're basically internally sending MIDI clock from Traktor to Ableton. And we've been like experimenting with all different kinds of ways of syncing Ableton and Traktor. Like he used to carry 2 laptops on tour, and I remember one night it was you, me, and Tim, his other tour manager, and I was like, there's got to be a way we can do this on one laptop.
Mr. Liebing still does carry 2 laptops.
Yeah. And I remember staying up all night that night, fiddling with different options, plugging a MIDI cable and like a sound card into itself with MIDI cable, trying to trick the computer. And finally, Native Instruments came out with this Traktor Virtual MIDI. It only works on Mac, but so we're sending MIDI clock from Traktor to Ableton. So when you change speeds, it changes the speed of Ableton as well.
Do you see this as the future of DJing, or is this something new? Traditionally, 2 decks and a mixer, right? That's traditionally what DJing is, and it's become so far now and so far removed from that.
Especially when the stems thing comes out. I mean, that's going to further complicate the definition of what is DJing. I mean, I don't know what. Sometimes I get into heated, conversations with some of the younger DJs about what the art form of DJing means to them and what it should mean to all of us now. And you have to understand that, the era that I grew up in, that was one thing. Obviously, I've adapted to technological changes, and my definition of what DJing is, the art form of DJing, differs completely to the 16, 17-year-old who grew up completely wired into all this technology and has a completely different mentality and approach about that. They don't have that foundation and that history that I do. But I'm happy that I've had that, because that forms the basis of my foundations in pursuing a more futuristic approach with technology to the art form of DJing.
What is your definition of DJing?
For me, it's always been, and sometimes in interviews I tell the story of how I was greatly influenced by 2 DJs. There were 2 DJs in the Washington, D.C. area. Both were English in the late 80s, early 90s. And there were 2 clubs that were the most famous clubs in D.C., the Vault and Fifth Column. And in the Fifth Column, there was a DJ named Christian Wolf, and he was technically incredible. You couldn't touch the guy, and he was always playing from open to close, and I was always there from open to close, listening to him week in, week out. And then there was another guy, and they didn't like each other too much. His name was Ian Carnes, and he was at a club called the Vault next door, and he couldn't mix to save his life. He was train wrecking every mix. I was just laughing, scratching my head. How did this guy get a job here? But both were making regular trips to the UK. Their taste in music was impeccable, and they both had a different approach. But with Ian, who couldn't mix, I basically learned the art form of how you program a set, how you program an entire night to elicit a particular reaction from the crowd, to create the right atmosphere, because it's very important, the kind of early, especially in the early part of the night, the kind of atmosphere that you create really translates and resonates to how the rest of the night plays out, and whether you have the crowd in the palm of your hand. So I learned that valuable lesson from Ian, and with Christian, I learned also, he was incredible at programming, but I learned that having a technical approach to how you program goes a great distance as well, So I try to adopt both philosophies into what I do.
And before we get to questions for you guys, is there one bit of advice you give? I mean, you mentioned these kids who've been exposed to technology. Is there one piece of advice you have for them as someone who's just is really passionate about DJing and is just starting their career? I
mean, I always tell people to take your time, question everything. It's okay to be inspired and influenced by the DJs that you look up to and the producers that you look up to, but don't try to be them. Don't try to emulate them. Try to come up with your own unique way, because you're not going to stand out. Like I said before, it's a tough time for newcomers, and you're not going to stand out if you just if you're impatient, you just want to get a track out there, even though it's not your best work, or if you're trying to sound like someone else. So just have patience, and if you follow, I've always followed my instinct and my heart, and if I'm really feeling something, I hope and I pray, and I've actually witnessed everybody else ends up gravitating towards it and appreciating it for what it is, and appreciating my individuality and my originality. So, yeah, pretty much.
So anyone got any questions Just pick up your hand.
Thank you very much. That was a really nice interview. Could you be a little more detailed in your discussion about creating the environment, about programming? Thank you.
Programming like in a DJ booth?
Oh,
or
no,
any
I'm
DJ
sorry. About
environment?
the, you said you learned from those two DJs in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah, programming, like programming a set.
Yeah, doing the mood, building it up, taking it down, like
Yeah, I mean-
how you go about doing that.
I can't tell you how many times I've walked into like an empty club and, you know, the DJ is like playing 140 beats per minute, like really abrasive. I mean, and it's beyond me how, and there's nobody, you know, nobody in the club, but they're like banging it out. And I just don't understand, I mean, how they think they're creating an atmosphere by doing that. There's certain clubs every year still that I love to play open to close. Womb in Tokyo is one of those clubs. And, you know, I'm able to, I go in, obviously the club is empty, people start filtering in, so I can create an atmosphere by maybe playing some ambient music, playing some more sort of like background listening music that I'm into, and then gradually building it up. And, you know, I play with key lock on, which allows me to really make a seamless, weave different genres seamlessly for a long period of time. So I may play like, you know, 2 or 3 ambient songs in one key. You would, you know, unless you really knew the tracks, you wouldn't know when the next song was coming in. So I would create sort of a, you know, an early part of the night atmosphere with that, and then go into a song that has a rhythm, and I would make sure that that song is in the same key as, you know, the ambient stuff that I was playing before. And then that kind of like opens like a nice bottle of wine, you know? It's like, it's you know, weaves perfectly from a beatless intro into maybe a deep house sort of vibe, and then I just build layer upon layer. I'm also starting with a very low BPM, typically like 122 or something like that. I know I want to end up at around 126 for clubs. With festivals, I play like, you know, probably my peak BPM is like 128 or something, just because you need more energy with festivals. But I find that the faster you play, the less funky my style of music ends up sounding. So I like to keep it funky by keeping it, you know, at about 126. So I, you know, mix in key, I build gradually, and I'm also, while the night is progressing, I'm increasing the BPM.
Cool. So probably got time for 2 more questions.
Thank you for sharing. I was wondering, since you're going out sends back into the sound card, do you find that there's an issue with any kind of delay for the effect, and then how do you resolve that?
Like latency.
Latency, yeah.
Basically, if the programs are synced, the effects are going to be synced. But the way that we got them synced is you basically turn a metronome on in Traktor and in Ableton. And you have to go into Ableton, and there's this little caret drop-down menu thing. You got to go in and adjust the latency of Ableton until both metronomes are perfectly in time. And you got to find that right number for your computer, you know. And once you got it, it's pretty much stays
or
off.
just if you have a kick drum loop, just play kick drum and play the metronomes on top, and then you'll hear when it's off, and then you'll get closer and closer to having it locked.
We got a question right there. Yeah.
Hey, how you doing? I actually got 2 questions. Mostly this is for the young ones, but I want you to elaborate, one, on how being a DJ is more like group sex than masturbation, because I see a lot of that lately with these DJs that come up with their laptop and their program sets, and they just sit there and act like they're playing buttons, and it's actually a pre-recorded thing, and they're up there jerking off while there's nobody on the dance floor, while as back in the day, we bet, you know, how many people are you going to bring onto the floor with your track? Elaborate that, how that, like, because how you're saying you had 1 foot on the dance floor and 1 foot on the, and I think that's something, could you elaborate on that? And also, could you elaborate on the actual value of key and swing? Because a lot of the kids getting into DJs aren't musicians.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that you need to be perfect or have like a musician's knowledge of you know, your approach to DJing or your approach in the studio. I mean, a classic example is, maybe not a classic example, but like one that comes to mind right now is like, you know, anybody know the White Stripes? Obviously, the White Stripes, Jack White and Meg White, they're not around together anymore, but like, Jack White was always defending. Meg White wasn't a drummer. She didn't know how to drum. She was, I think, you know, they were just going out and they decided to start the band. And, but the fact that she didn't know how to drum gave the White Stripes their unique sound and style. So it's not like, I mean, Jack White was, you know, the consummate musician or whatever, but, you know, when he added her to the mix to round out, you know, their mix, you know, where you have his musicianship and her lack of musicianship, that created a very, very cool dynamic. So that could also be interesting. You know, you could also possibly arrive at your own unique sound by not having the kind of knowledge that I had, you know, playing in bands and working with engineers and learning about key and all this other stuff. But having that knowledge definitely, I guess, makes you a bit more refined. And it's about, you know, for me, it's about being a bit more classy and refined and approaching what I do with a bit more finesse. So if you don't have that background, you're probably not going to be exhibiting a lot of finesse in how you play. And you'll probably be playing 140 beats per minute, you know, when no one's at the club and mixing out of key and making music that's out of key or whatever. I hope that answered your question.
Please give it up for Endo and Dubfire.
Thank you.